Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to today's edition of RE388, where I take old stories I've narrated and update into modern audio standards. This particular story is called New Recruits, written by shoguncdn. Captain Ools was in a foul mood. As the ship wove through the tunnels on its way to the Lilith, the captain could only wonder what he did to deserve this. They had ordered him to clear out his entire ship to make room for these human soldiers, a species that didn't even have tunneling abilities. Now, his once proud ship was reduced to carrying 10,000 of these primitives. At least, he wasn't alone in this disgrace. 4 other ships in his squadron also had their holds full of humans. Ools swore that he could smell them through the layers of metal that separated them. He could barely keep his contempt in check when the human captain met him prior to takeoff. "Please ensure your soldiers don't hamper the Asketh forces," Captain Ools had warned the human. He thanked the primal Koth that the other ships in the fleet carried proud Asketh troops. The conflict on Lilith was critical to ending the decades-long war, and Asketh High Command had gathered all resources at its disposal. Given the civilian population on the planet and the critical nature of the infrastructure in the enemy stronghold, the enemy was going to have to be routed out by the ground troops. Ools had to give humans a little bit of credit. Despite being new to the galaxy, they volunteered their troops to the effort. Once they convinced themselves that they were on the right side of the conflict, they prepared their people and equipment for the final push. The only problem was their ships had no tunneling ability. Relying on their own ships, it would have taken the humans literally years to reach Lilith through conventional space, and there was no time to retrofit their ships. Ools's protest to High Command went unheeded, and he was forced to offload Asketh's soldiers to make room for the humans. He may as well have been carrying animals, Ools thought to himself. Perhaps they would die quickly and act as fodder until the Asketh soldiers could properly rout the enemy. "Clearing the tunnel, hard atmo burn in 30, came the call over the comms. "Combat landing, helmsman. Do not spare the gears. We'll either fix them later or we'll be dead, and it won't matter," Ools barked. The plates on his head took on a slight red glow as the fires of battle began to rise within him. The ship landed with a wrenching of metal against hard ground, and Ools felt and heard hundreds of pieces of his prized ship breaking and twisting. All credit went to his helmsman, however, as the ship shuddered to a stop without exploding. After a moment to recover from the impact, Ools got his wits about him again. "All power to forward shields suppressing fire from main guns," Ools shouted. "Ground troops, prepare for—" His last words were cut short as thousands of human soldiers filled the view screen. They streamed out of every ship they were on, covering almost every inch of the empty space around and in front of the ships. Even over the roar of the guns, he could hear the human voices raised in unison, charging into the breach. The Asketh troops, meanwhile, were still readying themselves after the hard landing as the humans established a bulkhead. Ools was impressed. At least they weren't cowards. Ools turned on fleet-wide comms. "Once we establish a defensive posture, we'll have to—" Again his words were cut off as the humans began massing from their positions, advancing on fortified enemy encampments. Ools could barely keep up with what he was seeing. Legions of the humans were pushing forward, battling, feinting, and flanking. The entire night sky was filled with flashes of small arms fire and explosions. The Asketh troops that had managed to deploy were now far from the front lines as the human contingent covered ground with impossible speed. They were simply unconcerned about their own welfare. Yet, when Ools checked the battle monitors, the human losses were far below what he would have expected. "Captain," the weapons officer shouted, "we're getting requests for artillery from the humans." "My Koth, give them every gun we have," Ools answered. There was nothing on the screen now but chaos and a haze, but the guns could still provide accurate fire with the proper coordinates. Soon, large explosions boomed on the battlefield as the ship's guns hit the marks they were being provided. Such fire was far more surgical than aerial bombardment would have been, preserving the crucial infrastructure. For the next 6 hours, the pattern continued as the humans pushed, called in for artillery, and pushed some more. Half the ship's guns registered empty as Ools depleted their batteries trying to keep up with the requests from their new allies. His entire crew began to suffer operational mistakes and failures as the pace and duration of the battle took their toll. Several crew had to be carried from the bridge, overcome with exhaustion as their stations were manned by replacements. Captain Uls himself could barely keep himself in his seat and refused his medical officer's pleas to rest, instead ordering her to provide him with stims. He would not leave his command until the battle was done. He owed that much to these soldiers and the humans. Finally, the sun began to rise, and they began receiving reports from the field. Clear, secure came in on multiple channels. The voices were numerous, and Uls noted, even in the days, all human. An hour later, the human soldiers began making their way back to the ships. Asker's troops had been tasked to remain on the field to keep the area secure and to guard the prisoners. Captain Uls made his way down to the bay doors. He had severely underestimated the humans. He needed to remedy the less than honorable way he had treated them. As the soldiers made their way back, Uls saw them helping their injured comrades, and, in some cases, carrying the bodies of the lost. Their faces showed the fatigue and stress of the night's battle, yet they maintained their discipline, swiftly getting treatment for the wounded and resupplying themselves with ammunition. On the ramp to the bay, Uls stood, searching for the human captain he had been introduced to. He finally saw the figure, recognized the insignia on the uniform. "Captain Boone," Uls said through the translator. Boone performed a human salute out of habit, even though the Askers did not share the same tradition. Uls, however, brought his own appendage to his head as best as he could mimic the action. Boone took off her helmet, her face streaked with ash and dirt. "Captain," Uls said, "your soldiers are... I've never seen anything like them. You're on my ship. I hope that we were able to prove ourselves as worthy." Captain Boone nodded. "Well, we appreciate the ride," she said, walking away. End of story. Story number 2. Let's ask the humans a question. Written by WegianWarrior. Secretary Flamon dipped her tendrils as she swiped a delicate tentacle across the screen in front of her. "So that is dealt with. What is next on the agenda, Ancient Katob?" The Ancient Katob of Farrakhan, forebeing of the Advisory Committee of Non-Member Species, chewed his card as he glanced down at the synth sheet in front of him. "Terrans," Katob rumbled. "Terrans are spreading too fast, too wide. We must find a way to slow their growth so our cultures can prepare and adapt to their presence." "Why don't we turn their natural inquisitive against them?" a fuzzy-sounding voice from far end of the table asked, as its owner seemed to fade in and out of focus. "Let us give them an unanswerable question and claim that it is vitally important that they aid us in the finding of the answer." Everyone looked at the Ancient Katob as he chewed in thought, before he dipped his horns in agreement. "Excellent idea. Member Ka'at. But what pointless question shall we ask of the Terrans?" The various members of the committee thought deeply, apart from the Tomogorn of Taudron, who was hibernating quietly in her chair. "Gentle beings, I have an idea," Flimlon interjected quietly. "A question so vague and grand it'll occupy them virtually forever. A question that has no philosopher has ever answered, and will never until the heat death of the universe." "Very well, Flimon," Katob said as he unfolded himself from his bench. "See to it, will you?" Katob rapped a hoof on the floor, bringing the meeting to order. "Shall we begin? There is but one item on the agenda. I see the Terrans are still busy expanding. Did they refuse the question?" "They must have," Ka'at said. "The question is unanswerable as well as meaningless. But it should take the Terrans ages to realize that." All eyes, echolocators and organic radar swung towards Fulmon, except those belonging to the Tomogorn of the Taudron, who was still quietly hibernating in her chair. No, Fulmon said quickly. "It turns out that the Terrans already knew the answer to the question." The Ancient Katob rumbled loudly. "What?" "Impossible." Fulmon waited until the committee of members had calmed down somewhat. "We asked a lot of the Terrans," Fulmon explained quickly, "and they all agreed on the answer. Some of them quite violently so." "I refuse to believe that," Ka'at said hotly. "The Terrans don't even agree on their own nutritional requirements or their preferable temperature range for their species." Flimlon shrugged with all her tentacles. "Nevertheless," she said softly, "they were quite insistent that they worked it out before they were FTL capable." Preposterous, Katob rumbled so loud that the table vibrated. Pure Terran madness and megalomania. Fulmon shrugged again. Apparently the answer is 42, and before anyone suggested, Fulmon added, the Terran government has officially, and with some force, stated that it is not a Terran priority to find the question. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.